Hi friends, my name is Nandita. I am from Andhra Pradesh.
Good morning dear students. Today we are going to discuss about locomotion and movement from chapter 20 biology class 11 CBSE syllabus. Children, movement is one of the significant features of living beings. Animals and plants exhibit a wide range of movements. Streaming of protoplasm in the unicellular organism like amoeba is a simple form of movement. Movement of cilia, flagella and tentacles are shown by many organisms. Human beings can move limbs, jaws, eyelids, tongue, etc. Some of the movements result in a change of place or location. Such voluntary movements are called locomotion. Walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming are all some forms of locomotory movements. Locomotory structures need to be different from those affecting other types of movements. For example, in paramecium, cilia helps in the movement of food through cytopharynx and in locomotion as well. Hydra can use its tentacles for capturing its prey and also use them for locomotion. We use limbs for changes in body postures and locomotion as well. The above observations suggest that movement and locomotion cannot be studied separately. The two may be linked by stating that all locomotions are movements, but all movements are not locomotions. Methods of locomotions performed by animals vary with their habitats and the demand of the situation. However, locomotion is generally for search of food, shelter, mate, suitable breeding grounds, favorable climatic conditions, or to escape from enemies and predators. Children, in this section we are going to discuss about types of movement, muscles, skeletal system, joints, disorders of muscular and skeletal system. Children, now let us discuss about types of movement. Children, let us see the definition and meaning of movement. Movement is when living organisms move from one place to another place. In case the movement changes the location or position of a living organism, it is called locomotion. Climbing, running, and walking are examples of locomotion. Movement is a feature shared by all living organisms. It constitutes the various key aspects of living organisms, ranging from protoplasmic motion in a cell or unicellular organisms to organ movement in complex organisms. Children, now let us see what is locomotion. Locomotion refers to the movement that results in a location change. Movement of a body is performed by all living organisms including plants. Animals are able to move their body parts by movement of external body parts or internal organs. Children, let us discuss the purpose of external body part movements. They are like collecting information, maintenance of equilibrium, locomotion, capturing and ingestion of food, breathing, etc. Now, children, let us see the purpose of internal body parts movements are circulation of blood, exchange of gases, peristalsis movement of passage of food and urine, movement of gametes and fetus in genital tract and uterus during fertilization and childbirth respectively. Human body exhibits three main types of movements, that is amoeboid movement, ciliary movement and muscular movement. Children, let us discuss in detail about amoeboid movement, ciliary movement and muscular movement. Amoeboid movement. Amoeboid movement is the most typical mode of locomotion in adherent eukaryotic cells. Amoeboid movement is a crawling or oozing motion that some cells and unicellular organisms use to move. It characterized as by the following. Pseudopodia. The cells form pseudopodia or false feet, which are convex extensions of the cellular surface. Cytoplasmic flow. The cell uses cytoplasmic flow to pull itself forward by changing the thickness of cytoplasm in different areas of the cell. Plasmocell and plasmogel. Cytoplasmic fluid turns into plasmocell, a thinner, more watery version of cytoplasm which flows forward and pulls the membrane with it. At the tail end, cytoplasm thickens into plasmogel which forms a wall to prevent the plasmocell from flowing backward. Locomotion. Locomotion. Amoeboid movement can be used for walking, gliding and swimming. Amoeboid movement is used by a variety of cells including white blood cells, smile molds and protozoans. Children, let us see the amoeboid movement like crawling. Crawling is one form of amoeboid movement which starts when an extension of the moving cell pseudopodia bends tightly to the surface. The main bulk of the cell pulls itself toward the bound patch. By repeating this process, the cell can move until the first bound patch is at the very end of the cell, at which point it detaches. The speed at which cells crawl can vary greatly, but generally crawling is faster than swimming, but slower than gliding on the smooth surface. However, crawling does not become notably slower on uneven and irregular surfaces, while gliding becomes much slower under such conditions. It seems that crawling can be either left driven or actin driven, means see sections below, depending on the nature of the surface. Children, now let us discuss gliding. Gliding is similar to crawling, but it is characterized by much less adherence of the surface, making it faster on smoother surfaces, which requires less traction but slower on more difficult and complicated surfaces. Some cells glide with the same mechanism as crawling but with larger pseudopodia and less surfaces adherence. Other cells use a different method to glide. A small patch of the cell already touching the surface binds to the surface, after which the cytoskeleton pushes or pulls on the anchored patch to slide the cell forward. This difference forms the aforementioned mechanism in that the cell does not extend a pseudopod, so there is relatively little deformation of the cells as it progresses. Now let us discuss about swimming. Many different prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells can swim, and many of them have either flagella or cilia for that purpose. These dedicated structures are not necessary for swimming through, as they are amoeba and other eukaryotic cells which lack flagella and cilia but can still swim, although it is slower than crawling or gliding. There are two different proposed mechanisms for amoeboid swimming. In the first, the cell extends small pseudopods which then move down the slides of the cell, acting like paddles. In the second, the cell generates an internal flow cycle with the cytoplasm flowing backward along with the membrane edge and forward through the middle, generating a force on the membrane which moves the cell forward. Children, now let us discuss about the movement in ciliary and flagellar movement. This type of movement occurs those organisms which are covered with ciliated epithelium. It helps to capture dust particles that are inhaled during breathing and also helps to move the eggs from the fallopian tube into the uterus. Cilia and flagella are organelles that extends from the surface of eukaryotic cells and move in different ways to perform various functions. Let us discuss each and everything in detail. First one is movement. Cilia move in a rational, fast beating motion, while flagella moves in a rotatory motion in prokaryotes and a bending motion in eukaryotes. Now come to the coordination. Coordination. Cilia beats in coordination or one after the other, while flagella beats independently. Function. Cilia help move protozoa through water and generate water currents for feeding. Flagella are only found in sperm cells in the human body. Rhythm. Cilia have two types of rhythm motion. One is metachronic, while cilia in a row beat sequentially, and isochronic, where all the cilia in a row beat at the same time. Mechanism. Cilia and flagella move due to the sliding of outer doublet microtubules relative to each other, which is powered by ATP. Doublet microtubules, which is relative to each other with mechanism. Cilia and flagella move due to the sliding of outer doublet microtubules relative to each other, which is powered by ATP. Children, now let us discuss about muscular movement. Muscles account for the majority of movement in a complex organism. Breathing, heart function, digestion, appendage movement, and locomotion are all carried out by various muscles of our body. The synchronized movement of the skeletal, neural, and muscular system is referred as locomotion. Muscular movement is the movement of the body that caused by muscle contracting. Muscles are responsible for most of the movement in a multicellular organisms, including breathing, digestion, and movement of limbs. Children, now let us discuss about types of movement. Children, let us see the definition and meaning of movement. Movement is when living organisms move from one place to another place. In case the movement changes the location or position of a living organism, it is called locomotion. Climbing, running, and walking are examples of locomotion. Movement is a feature shared by all living organisms. It constitutes the various key aspects of living organisms, ranging from protoplasmic motion in a cell or unicellular organisms to organ movement in complex organisms. Children, now let us see what is locomotion. Locomotion refers to the movement that results in a location change. Movement of a body is performed by all living organisms, including plants. Animals are able to move their body parts by movement of external body parts or internal organs. Children, let us discuss the purpose of external body part movements. They are like collecting information, maintenance of equilibrium, locomotion, capturing and ingestion of food, breathing, etc. Now, children, let us see the purpose of internal body parts movements are circulation of blood, exchange of gases, peristalsis, movement of passage of food and urine, movement of gametes and fetus in genital tract and uterus during fertilization and childbirth respectively. Human body exhibits three main types of movements, that is amoeboid movement, ciliary movement, and muscular movement. Children, let us discuss in detail about amoeboid movement, ciliary movement, and muscular movement. Amoeboid movement. Amoeboid movement is the most typical mode of locomotion in adherent eukaryotic cells. Amoeboid movement is a crawling or oozing motion that some cells and unicellular organisms use to move. It characterized as by the following. Pseudopodia. The cells form pseudopodia or false feet, which are convex extensions of the cellular surface. Cytoplasmic flow. The cells uses cytoplasmic flow to pull itself forward by changing the thickness of cytoplasm in different areas of the cell. Plasmocell and plasmogel. Cytoplasmic fluid turns into plasmocell, a thinner, more watery version of cytoplasm which flows forward and pulls the membrane with it. At the tail end, cytoplasm thickens into plasmogel, which forms a wall to prevent the plasmocell from flowing backward. Locomotion. Locomotion. Amoeboid movement can be used for walking, gliding, and swimming. Amoeboid movement is used by a variety of cells, including white blood cells, smile molds, and protozoals. Children, let us see the amoeboid movement like crawling. Crawling is one form of amoeboid movement which starts when an extension of the moving cell pseudopodia bends tightly to the surface. The main bulk of the cell pulls itself toward the bound patch. By repeating this process, the cell can move until the first bound patch is at the very end of the cell, at which point it detaches. The speed at which cells crawl can vary greatly, but generally crawling is faster than swimming, but slower than gliding on the smooth surface. However, crawling does not become notably slower on uneven and irregular surfaces, while gliding becomes much slower under such conditions. It seems that crawling can be either left driven or actin driven, means see sections below, depending on the nature of the surface. Children, now let us discuss gliding. Gliding is similar to crawling, but it is characterized by much less adherence of the surface, making it faster on smoother surfaces, which requires less traction but slower on more difficult and complicated surfaces. Some cells glide with the same mechanism as crawling, but with larger pseudopodia and less surfaces adherence. Other cells use a different method to glide. A small patch of the cell already touching the surface binds to the surface, after which the cytoskeleton pushes or pulls on the anchored patch to slide the cell forward. This difference forms the forementioned mechanism in that the cells does not extend a pseudopod, so there is relatively little deformation of the cells as it progresses. Now let us discuss about swimming. Many different prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells can swim, and many of them have either flagella or cilia for that purpose. These dedicated structures are not necessary for swimming through, as they are amoeba and other eukaryotic cells which lack flagella and cilia but can still swim, although it is slower than crawling or gliding. There are two different proposed mechanisms for amoeboid swimming. In the first, the cell extends small pseudopods which then move down the slides of the cell, acting like paddles. In the second, the cell generates an internal flow cycle with the cytoplasm flowing backward along with the membrane edge and forward through the middle, generating a force on the membrane which moves the cell forward. Children, now let us discuss about the movement in ciliary and flagellar movement. This type of movement occurs those organisms which are covered with ciliated epithelium. It helps to capture dust particles that are inhaled during breathing and also helps to move the eggs from the fallopian tube into the uterus. Cilia and flagella are organelles that extends from the surface of eukaryotic cells and move in different ways to perform various functions. Let us discuss each and everything in detail. First one is movement. Cilia move in a rational, fast beating motion, while flagella moves in a rotatory motion in prokaryotes and a bending motion in eukaryotes. Now come to the coordination. Coordination. Cilia beats in coordination or one after the other, while flagella beats independently. Function. Cilia help move protozoa through water and generate water currents for feeding. Flagella are only found in sperm cells in the human body. Rhythm. Cilia have two types of rhythm motion. One is metachronic, while cilia in a row beat sequentially, and isochronic, where all the cilia in a row beat at the same time. Mechanism. Cilia and flagella move due to the sliding of outer doublet microtubules relative to each other, which is powered by ATP. Doublet microtubules which is relative to each other with mechanism. Cilia and flagella move due to the sliding of outer doublet microtubules relative to each other, which is powered by ATP. Children, now let us discuss about muscular movement. Muscles account for the majority of movement in a complex organism. Breathing, heart function, digestion, appendage movement, and locomotion are all carried out by various muscles of our body. The The synchronized movement of the skeletal, neural, and muscular system is referred as locomotion. Muscular movement is the movement of the body that caused by muscle contracting. Muscles are responsible for most of the movement in a multicellular organisms, including breathing, digestion, and movement of limbs. Amoeboid movement. Amoeboid movement is the most typical mode of locomotion in adherent eukaryotic cells. Amoeboid movement is a crawling or oozing motion that some cells and unicellular organisms use to move. It characterized as by the following. Pseudopodia. The cells form pseudopodia or false feet, which are convex extensions of the cellular surface. Cytoplasmic flow. The cells uses cytoplasmic flow to pull itself forward by changing the thickness of cytoplasm in different areas of the cell. Plasmocell and plasmogel. Cytoplasmic fluid turns into plasmocell, a thinner, more watery version of cytoplasm which flows forward and pulls the membrane with it. At the tail end, cytoplasm thickens into plasmogel, which forms a wall to prevent the plasmocell from flowing backward. Locomotion. Locomotion. Amoeboid movement can be used for walking, gliding, and swimming. Amoeboid movement is used by a variety of cells, including white blood cells, smile molds, and protozoals. Children, let us see the amoeboid movement like crawling. Crawling is one form of amoeboid movement which starts when an extension of the moving cell pseudopodia bends tightly to the surface. The main bulk of the cell pulls itself toward the bound patch. By repeating this process, the cell can move until the first bound patch is at the very end of the cell, at which point it detaches. The speed at which cells crawl can vary greatly, but generally crawling is faster than swimming, but slower than gliding on the smooth surface. However, crawling does not become notably slower on uneven and irregular surfaces, while gliding becomes much slower under such conditions. It seems that crawling can be either left driven or actin driven, means see sections below, depending on the nature of the surface. Children, now let us discuss gliding. Gliding is similar to crawling, but it is characterized by much less adherence of the surface, making it faster on smoother surfaces, which requires less traction but slower on more difficult and complicated surfaces. Some cells glide with the same mechanism as crawling, but with larger pseudopodia and less surfaces adherence. Other cells use a different method to glide. A small patch of the cell already touching the surface binds to the surface, after which the cytoskeleton pushes or pulls on the anchored patch to slide the cell forward. This difference forms the aforementioned mechanism in that the cell does not extend a pseudopod, so there is relatively little deformation of the cells as it progresses. Now let us discuss about swimming. Many different prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells can swim, and many of them have either flagella or cilia for that purpose. These dedicated structures are not necessary for swimming through, as they are amoeba and other eukaryotic cells which lack flagella and cilia but can still swim, although it is slower than crawling or gliding. There are two different proposed mechanisms for amoeboid swimming. In the first, the cell extends small pseudopods which then move down the slides of the cell, acting like paddles. In the second, the cell generates an internal flow cycle with the cytoplasm flowing backward along the membrane edge and forward through the middle, generating a force on the membrane which moves the cell forward. Children, now let us discuss about types of locomotion. Locomotion requires a perfect coordinate activity of muscular, skeletal, and neural system. Locomotion takes place several forms such as walking in man, creeping movement in earthworm and lizard, sensorial movement in horse and flightless birds, hopping in frog and rabbit, running in dog and horse, flying in insects and birds, swimming in fish and whale. Children, now let us discuss about different types of locomotion in different animals. Let us see the locomotion in protozoa. Locomotion in protozoans occurs by the help of cilia, flagella and pseudopodia. Now come to porifera. Locomotion in poriferas, we can see sponges are sedentary or fixed animals which are always attached to some substratum. Hence, locomotion never takes place in porifera. Now come to coelenterids. Locomotion in coelenterids is largely due to the contraction of the epidermal muscle fibers. Children, these are some types of movements takes place in coelenterids like swimming, floating, surfacing, climbing, walking, gliding, somersaulting, looping, bending, swaying movement. Now children, now let us discuss about helminthes. Locomotion is not required by adult due to parasitic adaptations. However, in Miracidia, a larva locomotion occurs by cilia, in Cercaria larva by the tail. In Ascaris, 15% locomotion occurs by cuticle fiber. In Planaria, locomotion is by cilia and muscles. Now let's discuss about annelids. Leech, earthworm and nereis have well developed circular and longitudinal muscles in the body wall that help these animals to move about. Parapodia and Cetia are helpful for the locomotion in nereis. In earthworms also locomotion occurs by Cetia. Now let us discuss about arthropods. In arthropods, locomotion takes place with the help of jointed legs and a pair of wings. Cockroaches, houseflies, etc. These move from one place to another place by legs walking or by wings fly both. Palimon or prawn crawls at bottom by pairs of walking legs. Palineus or Indian scorpion uses 4 pairs of walking legs. Hence, all insects use 3 pairs of walking legs for locomotion. Now let us discuss about mollusca. In all the molluscas, the locomotory organs is thick-walled, muscular, broad and laterally compressed foot. In some molluscas, the foot is modified into 8 or 10 arms, example Sepia, loligo, octopus, etc. Foot is chiefly a locomotory organ in Unio and Pila both. In Neophilinia, also locomotion occurs by foot. In Cephia, loligo, locomotion occurs by fins mainly. Let's discuss about echinodermata. In echinoderms such as starfish, the locomotory organs are tube feet and locomotion takes place by water vascular system which sets up a hydraulic pressure. The tube feet are associated with this system intimately. At the time of locomotion, one or more arms of a side work as main structures. Now let us come to vertebrates. In vertebrates, locomotion takes place with the help of skeletal muscles and skeleton. The locomotory organs are a pair of legs. Now let us discuss about the muscles. Children, muscle tissue or muscle is essential mesoderm. It is an association of cells that is responsible for body movement. The 3 main muscle types are skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle and smooth muscle in human body. An adult human body has between 650 to 840 muscles according to anatomy. Muscle is specialized tissue of mesodermal origin. Already we discussed that. About 40 to 50% of the body weight of human adult is contributed by muscles. They have special properties like excitability, contractility, extensibility and elasticity. Based on the structure, location and function, there are 3 types of muscles, especially in human beings, that are skeletal, visceral and cardiac. Children, let us discuss the types of muscles. First one is muscle pair. Muscles work in a pair as antagonists and agonists to move a joint. The agonist contracts and shortens while the antagonist relaxes and lengthens. Muscle spasms. A muscle spasm, also known as Charlie horse or muscle cramp or twitch, is an involuntary muscle movement. This can be caused by stress, exercise, dehydration, nerve disorders, or thyroid problems. Skeletal muscles. These muscles are stripped and appearance and contract when you want them to. They attach to bones and act as levers to move limbs. Hamstring muscles. These three muscles are located at the back of the thigh and are used for walking, climbing stairs, and other leg movements. Quadriceps muscles. These four large muscles are located at the front of the thigh and are responsible for lower body movement and propulsions. Children, muscle movement is seen in the chin, tongue, limbs, etc. The bones of muscles and nerve system are all involved in locomotion. Muscular movement is the movement of the body that's caused by muscles contracting. Muscles are responsible for the most of the movement in multicellular organisms, including breathing, digestion, and movement of limbs. Here are some of the things to know about the muscular movement. Children, already we discussed that we all are aware of the main three types of muscles. First one, let us discuss about cardiac muscles or striated and involuntary muscles, and these are found in the heart. Cardiac muscles are also striated and are not under voluntary control. They occur exclusively in the walls of the heart. Cardiac muscle is the primary tissue in the heart walls and it is responsible for the heart's ability to pump blood also. Cardiac muscles cells are called cardiomyocytes and are joined together by intercalated discs. Children, now let us discuss about visceral muscles or non-striated and smooth muscles. They are involuntary too and support different internal organs as well as participated in functions including digestion and reproduction. Visceral or smooth muscles are non-striated and involuntary muscles. Already we discussed that, and these are found inside the walls of the hollow internal organs like the alimentary canal, blood vessels, reproductive tract. Let us discuss about skeletal muscles or striated and voluntary muscles. These muscles are that control locomotion and appendage movement. Skeletal muscles are mostly attached to the skeleton and are control motor movements and posture. Skeletal muscles exhibit transfer strips and hence are designated as striated muscles. Each organized skeletal muscle is made up of a number of muscle bundles or fascicles held together by a common collagenous connective tissue layer called fascia. Muscle is composed of a large number of elongated cells called muscle fiber. The outermost covering of muscle is called epimysium. Each bundle of muscle fiber called fasciculus is surrounded by another connective tissue covering called perimysium. Inside fasciculus, there are several muscle fibers, each surrounded by connective tissue covering called endomysium. Each muscle fiber is lined by the plasma membrane called cyclolemma, enclosing by cytoplasm. Children, let us discuss about muscle fiber and sarcomere anatomy. Skeletal muscle are present in the animal body most abundant. They are composed of bundles of muscle fibers surrounded by connective tissue. Fascicles, a muscle such as a biceps, is made up of numerous muscle bundles that are held together by fascia. A connective tissue layer and several muscle fibers are found in each fascicle. Children, let us discuss about muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are long cells. They are grouped into fascicles. Muscle fibers have the following characters like skeletal muscle fibers are all long, cylindrical and serrated. It is syncytium, which means it has many nuclei. The plasma membrane of the muscle fiber is known as the sarcolemma. Sarcoplasma is the muscle fiber's cytoplasm. Muscle fiber is syncytium, has the sarcoplasm, contains many nuclei. Endoplasmic reticulum, that is sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fibers, is the storehouse of calcium ions. A characteristic feature of the muscle fiber is the presence of a large number of parallelly arranged filaments in the sarcoplasm called myofilaments or myofibrils as a contractile element. Children, let us discuss about myofibrils. Multiple myofibrils run lengthwise and adjacent to each other in the sarcoplasm of each muscle fiber. Myofibrils alternating dark and light bands bring the muscle a straight look. Each myofibril is made up of even simplified structures known as myofilaments. Each myofibril has alternate dark and light bands on it. The light bands contain actin and it is called I band or isotropic band, whereas the dark band called A or anisotropic band and contains myosin. Both the proteins are arranged as a rod-like structures parallel to each other and also to the longitudinal axis on the myofibrils. Children, let us discuss about myofilaments. In a myofibril, there are two kinds of myofilaments. One is thin filament and other that are thick. Muscle contraction requires the attachment of thin and thick filaments. Now let us discuss about actin filaments or thin myofilaments. Actin filaments are thinner as compared to the myosin filaments, hence are commonly called thin and thick filaments respectively. The thin filaments, also known as actin filaments, are composed of three types of proteins. It is made up of two polymeric filamentous or F-actin filament that are wound around each other. They are globular or G-actin monomer polymers. Tropomyosin filament coil lengthwise around actin filaments. Troponin, which is found at specific points on tropomyosin, protects the active binding zones for myosin. Troponin and tropomyosin govern actin and myosin filaments binding and those play a significant role in a muscular contractions. Children, let us discuss about myosin filament, which is also called thick myofilaments. Myosin is used to make thick filaments or myosin filaments. It is a polymeric protein made up of polymeric units of the protein meromyosin. It is composed of three parts: a tail, a short arm or neck, and a globular head. At regular times, the head and across arms extends from the filament. The globular head compresses ATP and act binding sites. The enzyme ATPase is activated by the head. Children, let us discuss about sarcomere. A sarcomere is a muscle contraction functional unit. A myofibril is made up of hundreds of sarcomeres that are linked end to end. Sarcomeres are the fundamental unit of muscle contraction. It is made up of actin and myosin filaments repeating units in a particular order. Sarcomeres are merged at the ends by filaments that interweave to form the Z line. It is a sarcomere limiting membrane. At the regular intervals, actin or thin filaments are linked to the Z line. Between the thin filaments or thick or myosin filaments, they are kept together by a really thin fibrous membrane called the M line. Actin and myosin filaments span each other in a particular pattern, resulting in a muscle striation. They form three kinds of bands. The I band or isotropic band is the light band and it is made up of actin filaments connecting by two adjacent sarcomeres. Thick and thin filaments do not overlap in this case. The A band or anisotropic band is the dark band which contains both actin and myosin filaments that overlap. The H zone is the myosin filament center portion where actin filaments do not coincide with the thick myosin filaments. In the center of each eye band is an elastic fiber called Z-line which bisects it. The thin filaments are firmly attached to the Z-line. The thick filaments in the A band are also held together in the middle of this by a thin fibrous membrane called M-line. The A and I bands are arranged alternatively throughout the length of the myofibrils. The portion of the myofibril between two successive Z lines is considered as the functional unit of contraction and it is called a sarcomere. Hence, sarcomere are the contractical units of myofibrils. In a resting state, the edges of the thin filaments on either side of the thick filaments partially overlap on free ends of the thick filaments, leaving the central part of the thick filaments. This central part of the thick filament not overlapped by thin filaments and it is called the H or Z bands. Children, let us discuss the structure of contractical protein. The muscle fibers are composed of 20% protein, 75% water and remaining 5% is composed of inorganic and organic matters. Muscle proteins are myosin, actin, tropomyosin and troponin. Myosin. Thick filaments are made up of myosin molecules. Each myosin molecule contains two identical heads with a pair of helical strands which forms the tail. The upper surface of each globular head contains actin binding site and ATP binding site. Actin. It is the main constituent of thin filament. The actin filament resembles two strings of beads twisted in a double helix. Each bed is a molecule of J-actin having 55A diameter. It shows high affinity for calcium ions. In the presence of salts and ATP, it is converted into fibrous actin, F-actin. Tropomyosin. It is a two-stranded helical rod which is located in the groove between the two helical strands of actin. A troponin complex is attached to the tropomyosin at regular intervals of about 385 angstroms. Troponin. Troponin is a globular protein. It consists of three polypeptide chains and the calcium binding subunit, the inhibitory subunit and the tropomyosin binding subunit. It is an important control protein. It has high affinity for calcium, which calcium binds with the troponin. The active sites of active protein are exposed. Children, let us discuss about muscle contraction mechanism. Mechanism of muscle contraction is explained by sidling filaments theory, which states the contraction of a muscle fiber takes place by the sliding of the thin filaments over the thick filaments. Sliding filament theory of a muscle contraction was proposed by A.F. Huxley and H.E. Huxley in 1954. According to this theory, during muscle contraction, actin filaments slide inward on the myosin filament of A band with the help of cross bridges to reduce the length of the sarcomere. Sliding increases overlap of a thick myosin and a thin actin filaments and caused the sarcomere to shorten and the muscles contract as the result of this. The brain or spinal cord sends a signal to motor neurons to initiate muscle contraction. The neural signals induces the neurotransmitter acetylcholine to be released at the neuromuscular junctions. Sympathetic acetylcholine binds to receptors on muscle fibers, causing sarcolemma depolarization. The generated action potential propagates through the muscle fibers. The sarcoplasmic reticulum releases Ca2 plus ions into sarcoplasm. Another protein, dystrophin, regulates Ca plus 2 release. Ca plus 2 ions interact with troponin and alter its conformation. Myosin binding areas on actin filaments become visible. The myosin head also has an ATP binding site where ATP binds. The myosin head's ATPase activate, catalyze ATP hydrolysis. They coact myosin heads binds to actin, activate binding sites, creating a cross bridge. Following the attachment, the myosin head releases phosphate, resulting in the power stroke, myosin filaments deforms and pulls actin filaments towards the sarcomere center, causing the sarcomere and the muscle to shorten. During this process, ADP is released and ADP also responsible for myosin head detachment. This process is repeating in the existence of sufficient Ca+2 ions. Children, let us discuss what is muscle relaxation. When a neural signal stops, acetylcholinesterase is a protein that deactivates acetylcholine in the sympathetic cleft, which fibers enter a state of rest. Ca+2 ions are returned to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. In the complete lack of Ca+2 ions, the troponin and tropomyosin complexes recovers the actin filaments, myosin bind sites, and the sarcomere Z lines come back to its original position and muscle relax. Children, let us discuss about muscle fatigue. ATP derives muscle contraction and ATP is obtained by muscle fibers from the backup of creatine phosphate and glycogen. Under normal conditions, glycogen is turned into glucose, which is then used to produce ATP during cellular respiration. Muscles require a lot of energy when doing strenuous exercise. The body could not substitute the oxygen demand and glucose is degraded anaerobically. As a result, lactic acid builds up, causing muscle fatigue. Rigor mortis or short-term muscle stiffening after death is caused by ATP depletion as cellular respiration terminates. ATP is necessary for the dissociation of myosin head. In the absence of ATP, the cross bridges in the muscles that were contracting remain intact. It aids in calculating death time. Children, let us discuss about major types of skeletal muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are classified into two types based on the quantity of oxygen binding pigment, which is myoglobin, present in them. Based on the sarcoplasmic content, situation of nuclei and a number of formed elements, two types of fibers are recognized in a striated muscle, that are white and red fibers. White fibers, anaerobic muscles, are pale or white and have less myoglobin with mitochondria but much more sarcoplasmic reticulum. White muscles fibers are fat muscle fibers which lack myoglobin and have fewer mitochondria. These muscle fibers perform fast work for short duration, as the result of which these fibers get fatigued quickly. Example: eyeball muscles, flight muscles of sparrow. Now let us discuss about red fibers. Red fibers are also known as aerobic muscles, are reddish and contain too much of myoglobin and mitochondria. Red muscles are slow muscles fiber processing red heme protein and abundant mitochondria. These muscle fibers can perform slow sustained work over a long period without getting fatigued. Example: extensor muscle of back and flight muscles in kites. Children, let us discuss about human skeleton system. Humans are vertebrates. Animals have vertebral column or backbone. They rarely on a steady internal frame that is centered on a permanent spine. The human skeletal system consists of bones, cartilage, ligaments and tendons and account for about 20% of the body weight. The skeletal system is your body's support structure. It gives your body its shape, allows movement, make blood cells, provide protection for your organs and store minerals. The skeletal system is also called the musculoskeletal system. In human beings, the skeletal system is present inside the body, so it is called endoskeleton. Let us discuss about hydrostatic skeleton. The hydrostatic skeletons are located internally in cnidarians, annelids and those animals which can move by contracting the muscles surrounding the fluid-filled pouch, creating pressure within the pouch that cause movement. Human skeleton consists of 270 bones which are fused to become 206, and out of which 6 bones occurs as ear ossicles. The remaining 200 bones are divided into axial and appendicular skeleton. Children, let us discuss about axial skeleton. Axial skeleton comprises 80 bones distributed along the main axis of the body. The skull, vertebral column, sternum and ribs constitute the axial skeleton. Children, let us discuss in detail about skull. Skull. A bony part of our head is called skull. The skull is made up of 22 bony plates joined together. The skull is at the top of the vertebral column. It is composed of two main parts. One is cranium, second one is facial bones. Normally, the human skull has 22 bones, 14 facial skeletal bones and 8 cranial bones. The space containing the brain is the cranial cavity. The cavellarium or the skeletal vault is the upper part of the cranium, forming the roof and side walls of the cranial activity. The foundation of the skull is the lower part of the cranium, constitute the floor of the cranial cavity. The skull bones can be broadly divided into two main sections. Children, let us discuss in detail about the name of the bones which are present in facial skeleton. The name of the bone in facial skeleton, first one is mandibular, it is in one bone, and second one is vomer, it is also present one bone. Inferior conchae are present in two bones in facial skeleton. Palatine bones are two paired bones. Nasal bones are paired bones. Lacrimal bones are paired bones. Maxillae are paired bones, and zygomatic bones are also paired bones in facial skeleton. Now look into the cranium bones. Temporary bones, two bones which are paired. Peritial bones are also two bones, and optical bone is one, and sphenoid bone is one. Ethmoid bone is one. Frontal bone is one. Cranium skeletal system. The human face is made up of 14 bones. First, let us discuss about mandible. Mandible forms the strongest and largest facial bone. It compresses the body and two rami. The U-shaped body has mental foramen situated on the outer surface near the root apex of the second and third premolars. The foramen's opening is led backwards, laterally transmitting the mental nerve and the vessels. On the outer line surface of the body of mandible, the symphysis ment constitute a halo rich in indicative of the line of fusing the two halves of the mandible at the same time of development. The midline medial surface of the body of the mandible compresses to the mental spines, which gives rise to the genioglossus muscles and geniohyoid muscles. The monohyoid lines are oblique edges running laterally and backwards from the site of the mental spines to the region behind and below the third molar tooth, representing the attachment of the monohyoid muscle. The submandibular fossa is seen below the posterior section of the mylohyoid line for the sublingual gland, and the sublingual fossa is seen above the anterior section of the mylohyoid line. A small neck is inferior to the head. Children, let us discuss about vomer. It is a pole-shaped bone situated in the middle line of the nasal fossa. It forms the posterior part of the nasal septum. Not only that, but it is also mediates with the maxillary, ethmoid and palatine bones. Let us discuss about inferior conchae. This structure is a paired one forming the bony assistance of the inferior turbinate bilaterally. It is of surgical significance in the event when it blocks the inferior meatus and the nasolacrimal duct. Children, let us discuss about palatine bones. These irregular shaped paired bones, each compressing a main horizontal part and a vertical perpendicular plate. The horizontal plate anteriorly mediates with the maxilla and with that of a palatine bone of the opposite side in the midline, forming the posterior component of the hard plate. The vertical plate superiorly passes behind the maxilla and posteriorly mediates with the lateral pterygoid plate of the Sphenoid bone. This vertical plate ends in a small offering to the orbital floor at the posterior medial factor. It has two foramen, the lesser and greater palatine that lies in the posterior section of the plate, passing the lesser and greater palatine nerves and the vessels. Children, let us discuss about nasal bones. These are rectangular bones forming the bridge of the nose, articulating the frontal bone superiorly and with one another at the midline. It is comparatively thick at the superior articulation, inferiorly it is fine. This is a fracture prone site. These bones posteriorly mediate with the frontal process of maxilla. The anterior nasal aperture is formed by the lower borders with the maxilla. These are two nasal cavities divided by nasal septum that is constituted by the oma. The perpendicular plate of the ethmoid and the sepal cartilage, the middle and the superior conchae are edges of bones projecting into the nasal cavity from the ethmoid on the both sides. Children, let us discuss about lacrimal bones. These are the most fragile and the smallest facial bones and are located at the front part of the medial wall of the orbit. It is a paired bone anteriorly articulating with the frontal process of the maxilla and articulate posteriorly with that of lamina papyraceae of the ethmoid. It articulates superiorly with the frontal bone and the inferiorly with that of a orbital plate of the maxilla. This is a groove referred to as the lacrimal groove for the nasolacrimal duct seen in the anterior section of the lateral surface of the lacrimal bone. The lacrimal grooves unites anteriorly with the posterior periphery of the frontal process of the maxilla for the formation of the fossa that harbors the lacrimal sac. Children, let us discuss about maxillae. The both maxillae constitute the upper jaw parts at the lateral walls of the nasal cavities and the anterior sections of the hard plate and sections of the floors of the orbital cavities. The two bones unite in the midline at the antimaxillary structure forming the lower margin of the nasal apparatus. The infraorbital foramen penetrates the maxilla under the orbit. The alveolar process moves downwards and with the opposite side constitute the alveolar arch holding the upper teeth. Each of the hemimaxillas compresses the maxillary sinus, a big pyramid shaped body. Four evident possesses alveolar, frontal, palatine and zygomatic processes. Maxillaris body is hollow, compressing the maxillary sinus. Anterior walls of the sinus are facial surface of the maxilla and typically are thin. The middle wall is the lateral nasal wall. The sinus leads to medially and superiorly to the nasal cavity at the middle meatus. The superior roof of the sinus is the orbital floor, the sinus floor is the palatine and the alveolar process of the maxilla. The maxilla posteriorly mediates with the lacrimal bone forming the anterior part of the medial orbital wall. Children, let us discuss about zygomatic bones. It is a strong, thick and diamond-shaped bone forming the anterior and lateral projections to the midface and compresses four processes. The zygoma is a paired bones constituting the prominence of the cheek. The frontal process constitutes the lateral orbital wall and mediates with the frontal bone at the front zygomatic structure. The temporal process constitutes the zygomatic arch mediating with the temporal bone. The maxillary process mediates with the maxilla forming the infraorbital rim and a section of the floor of the orbit. The fourth process unites with the maxilla on the lateral wall generating the zygomatic distinction. The zygoma mediates with the sphenoid bone on the posterior component of the frontal process. The articulation is with the higher wing of the sphenoid bone constituting the lateral wall of the orbit. The zygomatic temporal and the zygomatic facial foramen are the only foramen of the zygomatic bone. Both these branches of the second division of the trigeminal nerve passes from inside the orbit to the face and provides sensory innervation to the structures associated. Children, let us discuss about cranial bones. The cranium or skull is made up of 8 bones that protect the brain and form the head. The cranium, also known as neurocranium, is formed by the superior aspect of the skull. It encloses and protects the brain, meninges, and cerebral vasculature. Anatomically, the cranium can be subdivided into roof and a base. Let us see what is a cranial roof. Cranial roof compressed of the frontal, occipital and 2 parietal bones. It is also known as calvarium. Let us see what is cranial base. Cranial base composed of the frontal, sphenoid, ethmoid, occipital, parietal and temporal bones. These bones articulate with the first cervical vertebrae, atlas and the facial bones and the mandible jaw. Children, let us discuss in detail about each and every cranial bone. First, let us see what is frontal bone. Frontal bone forms the forehead. It is a single bone constituting the anterior part of the calvaria and the higher third part of the forehead. The bone laterally mediates with the zygoma at the frontozygomatic suture. In its vault, it is coronal suture. It mediates with the parietal bones. This bone constitutes a great part of the orbit's roof. The thickening of this bone in the anterior part constitutes the superciliary arches. The curved altitudes provides evidence of the eyebrow. This rim is crossed over by the supraorbital notch transisting the frontal vessels and nerves. The bone compresses the air sinuses, 2 hollow spaces that are lined with mucous membrane found immediately above the orbital margins. The paranasal sinus is mucous membrane with the lining of the air-filled bones cavities. These are the frontal maxillary, ethmoid and sphenoid paranasal sinuses. It mediates with the nose, serving the lightening of the facial skeleton, acting as a voice resonators. This was a brief on skull bones, different types. Children, let us discuss about parietal bones. 2 bones that protect the brain and from the majority of the skull. These are 2 flat bones constituting most of the vault of the skull. It mediates with one another in the midline at the sagittal suture. It mediates anteriorly with the frontal bone at the coronal suture. It site of the joint between the coronal suture and the sagittal suture referred to as to be rigma. These bones posteriorly mediate with the occipital bone at the lambdoid suture at the site of joining the sagittal suture with the lambdoid suture referred to as the lambda. The bones laterally mediate with the squamous temporal bone at the squamous suture. They have paired foramen which is referred to as the parietal foramen and have a Children, let us discuss about temporal bones. Temporal bones. These bones are a paired structures at the base and lateral sides of the skull. Each of these bones compressed this process and parts. Tympanic section compresses the lateral auditory meatus and zygomatic part process constitute the zygomatic arch with the temporal process with the zygomatic bone. And petrous part found in the foundation of the skull. It harbors the internal acoustic meatus and structure of the inner ear. The mastoid process is deemed as the downgrowth from the petrous section and both referred as to petromastoid. Styloid process. This styloid process provides attachment to the ligaments and muscle. Squamous part forms the most superior located and largest section of the temporal bone. It unites the parietal bone to that of the squamous suture, constituting the part of the petrion. The canals of the foramen are present in the bone area. The external acoustic meatus, carotid canal for foramen lacerum, stylomastoid foramen, internal acoustic meatus and facial nerve canal. The temporary bones mediate with the mandibulary bone via the temporomandibular joint. The temporal bones glenoid fossa mediates with the condylar head of the mandible. The anterior periphery of the glenoid fossa is the articulate eminence. Children, let us discuss about occipital bone. The occipital bone protects the back of the brain and supports the head. These are unpaired trapezoid bones that are the main bones of the occiput. Back of the skull, it constitutes a major part of the basilar section of the neurocranium and the cerebellum fully. The bone superiorly mediates with the parietal bones at the lumboid suture, forming a section of the wallet of the skull. It is only the cranial bone inferiorly to the mediate with the cervical spine. It mediates with the sphenoid anteriorly at the base of the skull. This bone comprises three parts: basilar part, squamous part, condylary part. Out of this, the squamous part is the largest one. It is seen posterior to the foramen magnum and is curved from over to downwards. The outer surface has external occipital protuberance and three curved lines called nuchal lines. The superior nuchal lines and the highest nuchal lines run somewhat inferiorly. Further running inferior is the inferior nuchal line. The new internal surface of the squamous section is indicated by the grooves on the internal surface as a result of the venous cranial sinuses, that sigmoid sinuses, transverse sinuses, and the superior sagittal sinuses. The basilar part is seen anterior to the foramen magnum and the next to the petrous section to the temporal bone. It mediates anteriorly with the sphenoid bone. The condylar section is seen lateral to the foramen magnum. It has two kidney-shaped projections which mediate with the first cervical vertebrae. The jugular foramen is seen between the occipital bone and the petrous section of the temporal bone. The hypoglossal nerve leaves the neurocranium via the hypoglossal canal that penetrates through the condylary section of the occipital bone. Children, let us discuss about sphenoid bone. These sphenoid bones support facial muscles. These are single bones located at the center of the skull foundation and are a portion of the middle and anterior cranial foci. It has several processes which are intricate articulations with the facial and cranial bones found adjacent to it. It mediates with the ethmoid, temporal, frontal, occipital, parietal, zygoma, ulnar, palatine bones and at times to tuberosity of the maxilla. These bones resembles the shape of the butterfly with a great laser ring to the body and the petrigoid plates. Additionally, it has numerous foramen and fissures, optical canal, foramen ovale and the superior orbit fissure. Its body is hollow, forming two cavities distinguished by a fine bony spectrum. The hollow cavities are the sphenoidal air sinuses draining into the superior nasal meatus. On the body's superior surface is the depression for the pituitary gland, referred to as a sella turcica. The body is seen on the roof of the nasal cavity. Children, let us discuss about ethmoid bone. The ethmoid bone forms the eye socket structure and protects the nose. It is a single bone seen in the midsection of the anterior cranial fossa. It establishes a section of the anterior cranial fossa, nasal structure, and middle orbit walls, the crista gallia in the anterior cranial fossa. A bony upward projection provides the attachment to the flexor cerebri. The ethmoid plate that is perpendicular slopes downwards in the midline of the nasal cavity, constituting the anterior and superior part of the nasal septum. The posteriorly it mediates with the vomer and with that of the septal cartilages, establishing the nasal septum. The cerebriform plates of ethmoids mediate laterally and anteriorly with the frontal bone and posteriorly with the sphenoid bone. The olfactory nerve filaments advance via the ribriform plate. This bone is a pneumatic bone containing ethmoid air cells that drain into the middle of the superior nasal meatus. Children, let us discuss about vertebrae in human body. The vertebrae and the accompanying intervertebral discs are the basic skeletal components that make up the back. The skull, pelvic bones, scapulae and ribs contribute to the back skeletal structure and serve as the attachment points for muscles. Here let us learn more about the anatomy and functions of vertebrae in human body. The backbone is a long, hollow rod-like structure running from the base of the skull to the hip inside our body. The scientific name of the backbone is vertebral column. It consists of 33 small rings called vertebrae. Between various vertebrae of backbone are present with the disc-like structures called cartilage that is made up of soft bones. Our backbone supports the head, its top. The shoulder bones, rib bones and hip bones are all joined to the backbone. Vertebral column is a string-like vertebrae which extends in the mid-axis of the back, posterior part of our trunk from head to the lower inferior extremity of the trunk. Together with the sternum and rib, it forms the supporting framework of our trunk. Each vertebrae has a central hollow portion which is called neural canal through which the spinal cord passes. It supports and rotates the head, suspends the viscera, protects vital organs, provides attachment to limb girdles, facilitates some movements of the trunk and houses the spinal cord. Children, vertebral column makes 2/5 of total weight of body. The length of human vertebral column is 71 cm means 28 inches in adult male and about 61 cm means 24 inches in an average adult female. The vertebral column is differentiated into cervical 7, thoracic 12, lumbar 5, sacral 1 fused and coccygeal 1 fused region starting from the skull. Children, let us discuss anatomy of vertebrae. The 33 vertebrae are the primary bones of the back. The number of vertebrae and their specific properties varies according to the bodily location with which they are related. There are 7 cervical vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 sacral vertebrae and 3 to 4 coccygeal vertebrae. Already we discussed that. The sacral vertebrae unite to form a single bone structure known as sacrum. The coccygeal vertebrae have a simple form, range in the number of 3 to 4, 4 being most common and frequently unite into a single coccy. The total number of cervical, thoracic and lumbar vertebrae comes into 24 along with unfused sacral and coccygeal vertebrae. They make 33. Thus, the number of vertebrae present in human is 33. In adult humans, the 5 sacral vertebrae fuse to form a single sacrum and 4 coccygeal vertebrae fuse to form a single coccy. Those adults have only 26 vertebrae. Children, let us discuss about typical vertebrae. A typical vertebrae comprises a vertebral arch as well as vertebral body. The characteristic features in a typical vertebrae are as follows. Children, let us discuss in detail about parts of a vertebrae. The vertebral body is a typical, the most weight-bearing component of the bone and it is located anteriorly. It becomes larger from the cervical vertebrae C2 to the lumbar vertebrae L5. It is connected to another vertebrae by ligaments and intervertebral discs. Intervertebral discs are made up of fibrocartilaginous material divided the vertebral bodies of neighboring vertebrae. The vertebral arch is responsible for the posterior and later portions of the foramen vertebrae. Each vertebrae's vertebral arch is made up of laminae and pedicels. A vertebral foramen is an opening formed by a posterior portion of the vertebral arch and the anterior portion of the vertebral body. A spinous process emerges inferiorly and posteriorly from the intersections of two laminae and serve as a location for ligament and muscle attachment. On each side, a transverse process protrudes posterior-laterally from the pedicel laminae junction. Superior and inferior articular process also protrude from the area where the laminae and pedicel join. Children, let us discuss about cervical vertebrae. The number of cervical vertebrae are seen in almost all mammals including human beings. The first atlas C1 and the second axis C2 cervical vertebrae are designed to support the head movement. The primary differentiating characteristics of C1 is the absence of vertebral body. During development, the vertebral body of C1 merges with the body of C2 to form the dens of C2. The cervical vertebrae from C3 to C6 are small structures. The C7 bone has long penis process whose tip can be flat through the skin. Atlas vertebrae is the first cervical vertebrae whose body is formed by vertebral arch transfer process. It supports the globe of the head like earth by the atlas. The centrium and the neural spine are absent. Transfer processes are long with transverse foramen. The second cervical vertebrae is the axis vertebrae. Odontoid process and dens are formed which is modified form to the centrum of atlas. The odontoid process fits into the canal of atlas to provide head with sideways rotation. Transfer processes are small. Children, now let us discuss about thoracic vertebrae. The number of thoracic vertebrae are 12. The attachment of the 12 thoracic vertebrae with the ribs distinguishes them all. All vertebrae have rib elements. They are small and are incorporated into the transfer processes. However, in the thoracic, the ribs are separate bones that articulate via synovial joints with the associated vertebrates, vertebral bodies and transfer process. The presence of fates that functions as a site of attachment with the corresponding tubercle of the rib distinguishes the thoracic vertebrae from the vertebral bones. Also, when viewed from above, the vertebral body is slightly heart-shaped and the vertebral foramen is rounded. The thoracic vertebrae are numbered from T1 to T12. The T1 is closest to the skull and the T2 is typically larger than T1. The first four thoracic vertebrae are slightly similar to the cervical vertebrae, whereas the last four have characteristics similar to that of lumbar vertebrae. Children, let us discuss about lumbar vertebrae. The thoracic vertebrae are hallowed by 5 lumbar vertebrae, which created the skeletal support for the posterior abdominal wall and are distinguished by their large-sized bones. The outer characteristics featured in the lumbar vertebrae anatomy are a normal lumbar vertebral body is cylindrical and the vertebral foramen is triangular and bigger than that ones in the thoracic vertebrae. The L1 is leveled with the anterior end of the 9th rib. The lumbar vertebrae also lack facets for rib articulation except for those on vertebrae L5. It is a large and slightly conical shaped structure where the iliolumbar ligaments attach. Children, let us discuss about sacral vertebrae. Next, the 5 sacral vertebrae fused into a single bone known as sacrum. It articulates with the pelvic skeleton on either side and it is component of the pelvic wall. The anatomy of sacral vertebrae is as follows. It has a triangular form with an inferiorly pointed apex and it is bent to have a convex posterior and concave anterior surfaces. It articulates with the L5 vertebrae above the coccyx below. It features 2 big L-shaped facets for forming a connection with the pelvic skeleton, one on each lateral side. Children, let us discuss about coccygeal vertebrae. A 3 to 4 common variable number of coccygeal vertebrae are located inferior to the sacrum and merge into a single small triangular bone known as the coccyx. The coccyx has attachments with tendons, muscles and ligaments and is not entirely useless. But facilitating attachments is not the only original purpose of the cervical vertebrae. Hence they are considered vestigial. The coccyx tailbone articulates with the sacrum inferior ends and compresses 3 to 4 fused coccygeal vertebrae. The sacrococcygeal joint is articulation between the base of the coccyx and the apex of the sacrum. It is distinguished by its tiny size and absence of vertebral canal and vertebral arches. The first portion of this vertebrae is large and resembles the last sacral vertebrae. Children, let us discuss the functions of vertebrae. Function of vertebral column is to carry weight of the body during motions as well as while standing, and sit gives flexibility to one animal during one movement of head. Displacement of the vertebrae from its normal positions due to displacement or degeneration part of the intervertebral disc is called slip disc. The spinal column is a complex structure comprises various bones, joints, nerves, muscles, ligaments and tendons woven together to form a strong structure. This spinal or vertebral column is made up of a series of vertebrae. Already we discussed that. The vertebrae serves various purposes like support, protection, movement, etc. Let us have a look at the function of vertebrae in humans. Children, cervical vertebrae's function. It supports the head and aids in its movements up, down and left, right movements. It also houses 8 pairs of spinal nerves that innervate the shoulder, arm, neck and hand regions. Let us see the thoracic vertebrae functions. It supports the neck and anchors the rib cage. It also helps transfer to force from the torso to the lower segment of the spine. It houses 12 pairs of spinal nerves that controls various sensory and motor signals. Lumbar vertebrae's function. It protects cauda, means a bundle of lower spinal nerves along with the coccyx and sacrum. It provides support to the stabilizers and upper body and also controls leg movements. Sacrum and coccyx function. They form the back wall of the pelvis and hip. It also facilitates sitting, walking, running movements. Children, let us discuss about sternum. The sternum or breastbone is a vertical bone that resembles a partial T shape. It forms the front of the rib cage and it is connected to the ribs by cartilage. It is a flat, narrow and elongated bone of chest. It is commonly called breastbone. It is absent in fish, reptile and associated with pectoral girdle in amphibian. In man, it is made up of cervical manubrium, mesosternum and xiphoids process, etc. Children, let us discuss the structure and anatomy of sternum. The structure of the sternum consists of the following 3 sternum parts, which first one is called manubrium. The first part of the sternum is the manubrium, which is the top part and includes your collarbone. At this, the topmost ribs connect and the bottom of the manubrium shares a border with the other parts of the sternum. At the bottom of it, your second set of ribs of your body also connects. Now let us discuss about second part of the sternum, which is also called body. The middle part of the sternum is also known as the body and it is the longest part. It connects with manubrium at the top and to the xiphoid process at the bottom. You have often heard with the word cartilage that is present in the part of the sternum, and here your third set of ribs to the seventh set connects with the help of cartilage. The xiphoid process, the bottom part of the sternum, is also known as xiphoid process. The shape of its part can differ from the individual to individual, and as your age increases, the xiphoid process of the sternum slowly begins to calcify. Now let us discuss the functions of sternum. One of the significant functions of the sternum is to protect lungs, blood vessels and heart from any kind of injury, and it's one of the longest and largest flat bones present in our body. There are 2 major types of functions of the sternum in our body, and those are as follows. First one is support. One of the most significant function of the sternum is providing support to the chest and the upper abdomen of our body. It provides support to the rib cage and collarbone of your body and many other parts of your skeletal system. Protection. The sternum is present in the center of your chest and there are many organs near this area such as the heart, lungs, blood vessels, etc. So it protects them from all kinds of injury. Children, let us discuss about ribs. In vertebrate anatomy, the rib cage is a bony structure made up of ribs, their connections to the sternums and the vertebral column. It makes up the thoracic and chest and protects the heart and lungs. The rib cage is made up of 24 ribs attached to the 12 thoracic vertebrae and the sternum. Each rib is joined to the thoracic vertebrae and the sternum by its joints and cartilage, allowing for slight movement while breathing and performing other tasks. Ribs are classified according to the connection to the sternum. True ribs articulate with the sternum, whereas false ribs do not. The 11th and 12th ribs, also known as floating ribs, and are considered false ribs because they do not connect to the sternum. Ribs are anatomically made up of a head with two articular facets, tubercle, a neck, a shaft, and a costal groove. The typical structure of a rib is divided into several components. The ribs are curved bars which movably articulated with the thoracic vertebrae at the back and with the sternum in front. All collectively form a bony cage, the thoracic basket. There are 12 pairs of ribs. Each rib is a thin flat bone connected dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. It has two articulation faces on its dorsal and bicephalic. First 7 pairs of ribs, which are attached to the thoracic vertebrae and ventrally connected to the sternum with the help of hyaline cartilage, are called true ribs. The 8th, 9th and 10th pairs of ribs do not articulate directly with the sternum but join the 11th rib with the help of hyaline cartilage. These are called vertebrochondrial ribs. Last two pairs, 11th and 12th of ribs, are not connected ventrally and are therefore called floating ribs. Thoracic vertebrae, ribs and sternum together forms the rib cage. Children, ribs are classified into 3 categories based on the attachment to the breastbone. First one is true ribs, which is also called vertebrosternal ribs. These are the first 7 pairs of ribs attaching directly to the sternum with their own costal cartilages. Next one is false ribs, vertebrochondrial ribs. The following 3 pairs of ribs, 8th, 9th and 10th, are known as the false ribs because they do not directly attach it to the sternum. Instead of this, their costal cartilages are connected to the rib cartilage above. Floating ribs. The last 2 pairs of ribs, 11th and 12th, are termed floating ribs because their anterior ends are free and do not attach to the sternum or any other ribs. They are embedded in the muscles of the abdominal wall. Ribs are essential for respiration. During inhalation, the muscles between the ribs contract, pulling them up and down outward. This action expands the chest cavity, allowing the lungs to take in more air. Exhalation relaxes the muscles and returns the ribs and chest cavity to their resting position, allowing air to exit the lungs. Let us discuss the functions of ribs. The ribs perform several vital functions in the body. Protection. The ribs forms a protective enclosure around essential organs such as the heart and lungs, safeguarding them from the external harm. Respiration. The rib cage expands and contracts during breathing, aiding in lung expansion and air intake. Posture support. Ribs offer structural support for the spine, aiding in maintaining an upright posture and balance. Muscle attachment. Ribs act as point of attachment for muscle involving in breathing and movement of the trunk. Blood cell production. The ribs contain bone marrow where red and white blood cells are generated. Thermal generation. The rib cage helps regulate body temperature by assisting in the expansion and contraction of the lungs, which can impact heat exchange during breathing. The ribs protect the heart, large blood vessels and lungs. They bear respiratory muscles, external and internal intercostal muscles. The 2 pairs of ribs, 11th and 12th, protect the kidney. Children, let us discuss about appendicular skeleton. Appendicular skeleton is made up of girdles, pectoral and pelvic and limb bones, forelimb and hind limb. Pelvic and pectoral girdle supports hind limb and forelimb respectively. Each girdle is formed of 2 halves. The appendicular skeleton consists of 126 bones. Pectoral girdle. Shoulder bone or pectoral girdle. The shoulder bone is formed by the collarbone and the shoulder blade. It is attached to the upper part of the rib cage and to the upper arm bone. The shoulder blade is attached to backbone by muscles to allow the free movement of the shoulder. Pectoral girdle consists of 4 bones, 2 clavicles and 2 spiculae. The clavicle or collarbone is a slender S-shaped bone that articulates with the manubrium of the sternum. Scapula. Scapula is the large triangular flat bone situated in the dorsal part of the thoracic between the second and seventh ribs. The dorsal flat triangular body of the scapula has slightly elevated ridge called the spine, which protects a flat expanded process called the acromion. Below the acromion is a depression called the gelinoid cavity, which articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. The coracoid process is the knob-like inwardly bent fused scapula blade. Hip bone or pelvic girdle. The hip bone forms a large basin-shaped framework at the lower end of the backbone to which the legs are attached. The hip bone is also known as pelvic bone. It is made up of number of fused together by fixed joints. The thigh bones of our legs are joined to the hip bone by ball and socket joints. And each coxal bone is formed by fusion of 3 bones like ilium, ischium and pubis. At the point of fusion of the above bones is a cavity called acetabulum to which the thigh bone articulates. Ilium is a short and straight bone forming the upper broadest part of the coxa and prominence. Ischium is a elongated bone running parallel to vertebral column. It forms the middle portion of the lower part of coxa. Pubis. Pubis is the smaller bone and forms anterior portion of the lower part of the coxa of hip. Obturator foramen is present as a large oval gap between the pubis and ischium. The foramen forms passage for nerves and blood vessels. The 2 halves of pelvic girdle meet ventrally to form the pubic symphysis containing fibrous cartilage. The pelvic girdle serves several important functions in the body. It supports the weight of the body from the vertebral column. It also protects and supports the lower organs including the urinary bladder and the reproductive organs and developing facts in a pregnant woman. The pelvic girdle differs between men and women. In man, the pelvis is more massive. In women, the pelvis is more delicate. This difference reflects the woman's role in pregnancy and delivery of the children. Limb bones. Limb bones are of 2 types. One is forelimb and second one is hind limb. Bones of hands and legs. The upper limb of human body, the shoulder to the hand, is called an arm. There are 2 arms in skeleton. The 2 arms are attached to the shoulder blade to the skeleton by ball and socket joints. Each arm consists of 3 parts: the upper arm, lower arm and a hand. The upper is the form shoulder to elbow. The upper arm consists of a single bone called humerus. The lower arm is a form of elbow to wrist. The lower arm is made up of 2 bones, radius and ulna. The upper arm bone connects to the lower arm bones by a hinge joint at the elbow. The hands consist of various small bones which forms wrist, palm and fingers. The bones of upper limb, forelimb or of man are the following: arm, branchium, humerus is 1 bone, forearm, antebranchium, radius plus ulna is 2 bones, wrist carpus, 4 plus 4 carpals and 8 bones, palm, metacarpals, 5 metacarpals or 5 bones, fingers, pharyngeal formula, 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, 14 bones. Total one hand consists of 30 bone. Children, let us discuss about bones of forelimb. Each forelimb consists of 30 bones. Humerus or ulna bone or bone of upper arm is the longest and largest bone of the upper limb. It articulates proximally with the scapula and distally at the elbow with 2 ulna and radius. Humerus is characterized by the presence of deltoid tuberosity for the attachment of muscles. Distal end of the humerus at the elbow joints is a like pulley and called trochleus. Its grooves is called Olecranon fossa, whose basal part is marked by supratrochlear foramen for the passage of branchial artery and nerve. Humerus is characterized by the arterial foramen. Head of the humerus articulate with the glenoid cavity of pectoral girdle. Radius is present towards the thumb side and ulna is present towards the little finger side. Radius is small and ulna is larger. Styloid process is the present in distal end of the ulna and radius both. Olecranon process is present in ulna proximally, which forms prominence of elbow. Trochlear notch is formed by ulna, which is also known as sigmoid notch. Carpus or wrist bone are 8 in number, joined to one another by ligament. Carpals are arranged in 2 rows with 4 bones in each row. Metacarpals are in 5 in number and pharyngels are 14. Already we discussed that. The lower limbs of the body on which person walks on stands are called legs. These are 2 legs in the human body. The 2 legs are attached to the hip bone of the skeleton by a ball and socket joints. Each leg consists of 3 parts: upper leg, lower leg and foot. The upper leg is from hip to knee and the upper leg consists of single bone called femur or thigh bone. Wrist is made up of carpals, palm is made up of metacarpals and fingers are made up of phalanges. The lower leg is formed knee to ankle. The lower leg consists of 2 bones, tibia and fibula. The upper leg bone connects to lower bones with hinge joint. There is also a kneecap called patella. The foot consists of various small bones which from ankle, middle part of foot and toes. The ankle is made up of tarsals, foot is made up of metatarsals, toes are made up of phalanges. Children, let us discuss the bones of hind limb. Bones of lower limb or hind limb of a man are thigh bone, femur bone is 1, kneecap, patella is 1, leg, tibia and fibula are 2 bones, ankle 7 tarsals means 7 bones, sole 5 metatarsals 5 bones, phalangeals formula 2, 3, 3, 3 is equal to 14 bones. Total 30 bones are present in leg. Femur is the largest, longest and strongest bone of the body. Fova capitis is depression in the head of femur. Femur is also known as bone of thigh. Greater trochanter, lesser trochanter, third trochanter are present in femur of thigh and buttock muscles. Patellar groove is found in distal end of femur. The patella forms kneecap. Patella is formed by sigmoid bone. Fibula is also example of sigmoid bone. Tibia is a larger and also called shin bone. It bears weight of the body. Fibula is a smaller and associated with knee joints. Tarsal bones are 7 and metatarsals are 5. Already we discussed that. Ankle bones have 7 tarsals and arranged in 2 rows. Children, let us discuss about joints. Joints are essential for all types of movements involving the bony part of the body. Joints are points of contact between bones or 2 bones and cartilage. Force generated by the muscles is used to carry out movement through joints, where the joints act as fulcrum. The movable as these joints vary depending on different factors. Joints have been classified into 3 major structural forms, namely fibrous, cartilaginous and synovial. The fibrous joints are immovable or fixed joints. These do not show any movement due to the presence of a strong and tough white cartilaginous fibers. Example, the joints in tooth sockets between the skull bones. Cartilaginous joints are slightly movable joints. In cartilaginous joints, the bones involved are joined together with the help of cartilages. The joint between the adjacent vertebrae in the vertebral column of this pattern. Synovial joints. The synovial joints, freely movable joints, are present perfect joints in which bones are not fused with each other. Synovial joints are characterized by the presence of a fluid filled with the synovial cavity between the articulating surface of two bones. Such an arrangement allows considerable movement of nutrients and respiratory gases. These joints help in locomotion and many other movements. The synovial joints are surrounded by the tubular articular capsule. The articular capsule consists of layers: outer fiber capsule and inner synovial membrane. The synovial membrane secretes synovial fluid which lubricates and provides nourishment to articular cartilage. In old age, stiffness of joints is due to the decrease in synovial fluid. Structural arrangement of a perfect joint permits considerable movement of articulating bones with danger of friction. Due to the elasticity of ligaments of the wall of joint corpuscle, articulating bone automatically return back to their normal position after movements. Synovial joints are further classified according to the movement they permit, like ball and socket joint, hinge joint, which is also called a knee joint, pivotal joint, which is present between atlas and axis and radius and ulna, gliding joint between the corpuscles, saddle joint between corpuscles and metacarpals of thumb, condyloid joint, twist joint, and metacarpopharyngeal joints. First, ball and socket joint. Ball and socket joint is present between humerus and pectoral girdle. And in this joint, the rounded end of one bone fits into the cavity, which is hollow space of another bone. It permits movements in all directions. The joints between shoulder and the upper arm is an example of ball and socket joint. Similarly, the joint between the thigh and hip is an also example of ball and socket joint. Next, come to hinge joint. Hinge joint is present in knee joint. Hinge joints are found between the two or more than two bones where we need back and forth movement. This joint is similar to the hinges in a door. This joint allows movement only in one plane and only up to 1800. The knee joint and elbow joint are the examples of hinge joint. Pivot joint. This pivot joint allows for rotation, twisting, extension, and flexibility. This is the joint where our neck joints head and allow the movement of forward, backward, left and right direction. It is moreover like a cylindrical bone moving in a ring. Examples of these joints are head and arm. Gliding joint. Gliding joint is present in between the corpuscles, and saddle joint present in between the carpal and metacarpal of the thumb. Movement in this joint happens due to sliding of bones over one another. Joints between the rings of backbone are examples of gliding joint. The twist joint is also an example of gliding joint. Children, let us discuss the disorders of muscular and skeletal system. Myasthenia gravis. In myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder. It affects neuromuscular junction leading to fatigue, weakening and paralysis of skeletal muscle. Muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is the progressive degeneration of skeletal muscle, mostly due to genetic disorder. Tetany. Tetany is a rapid spasm, means wild contractions in muscle due to low calcium in body fluid. Arthritis. Arthritis is a painful condition of the joints. It may be preceded or accompanied by a period of fatigue and feeling of stiffness. Osteoporosis is a hereditary disease characterized by decreased bone mass and increased chance of fractures. Decreased levels of estrogen is a common cause for this disease. Osteoporosis. Gout. Gout is the accumulation of uric acid crystals in the region of joints which results in painful movement. Sprain. Sprain refers to injury to a joint capsule, typically involving a stretching or tearing of trends of ligaments. Unfortunately, both structures have much poorer generative power than bone, and once stretched often remain weak. Sprain is often considered a minor disorder, but it may become chronic. Fracture. Fracture is a break of a bone. Fracture occurs rarely in children. The bones of children have large quantity of organic matter and are therefore very flexible and less likely to break. With advancing age, mineral matter, calcium phosphate is deposited in the bones. This decreases the organic matter, making the bones hard and brittle. Those old people are more liable to fracture of bones. Children, let us discuss about summary. The movement is essential feature of all living beings. Protoplasmic streaming, ciliary movement, movements of fins, limbs, wings, etc. are some of exhibited by animals. A voluntary movement which causes the animals to change its place is called locomotion. Animals move generally in search of food, shelter, mate, breeding sound, better climate, or to protect themselves. The cells of human body exhibit amoeboid, ciliary, and muscular movements. Locomotion and many other movements require coordinated muscular activities. Three types of muscles are present in our body. Skeletal muscles are attached to skeletal elements. They appear straightened and voluntary in nature. Visceral muscles present in the inner wall of visceral organs are non-straightened and involuntary. Cardiac muscles are the muscles of the heart. They are straightened, branched, and involuntary. Muscles possess excitability, contractility, extensibility, and elasticity. Muscles fiber is the anatomical unit of muscle. Each muscle fiber has many parallel arranged myofibrils. Each myofibrils contains many serial arranged units called sarcomere, which is the functional unit. Each sarcomere has a central A band made of thick myosin filaments and two half I bands made a thin actin filaments on either side of it marked by Z lines. Actin and myosin are polymerized proteins with contractility. These active sites for myosin on resting actin filaments are masked by a protein, tropin. Myosin head contains ATPase and has ATP binding sites and active sites for acting. A protein neuron carries signal to the muscle fiber which generates an action potential in it. This causes the release of Ca++ from sarcoplasmic reticulum. The Ca++ actin which binds to the myosin head to form a cross bridge. This cross bridge pulls the actin filaments, causing them to slide over the myosin filaments and thereby causing contraction. Ca++ are then returned to the sarcoplasmic reticulum which inactive the actin. The cross bridge are broken and the muscles relax. The repeated stimulation of muscles leading to fatigue. Muscles are classified as red and white fibers based primarily on the amount of red colored myoglobin pigment in them. Bones and cartilage consist of a skeletal system. The skeletal system is divisible into axial and appendicular. The skull, vertebral column, ribs and sternum constitute the axial skeleton. The limb bones and girdles forms the appendicular skeleton. Three types of joints are formed between the bones or between bones and cartilage: fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. Synovial joints allows considerable movement and therefore play a significant role in locomotion. Thank you.